Joyce will figure it out.
Sure. Okay.
All right, we are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of my age. We are live, Aura8, and once again, we are here with a true legend of this industry, the man, CNBC literally nicknamed him the Godfather of Crypto, Michael Terpin, the guy who was back then doing PR for Ethereum and Tether when almost nobody even knew what crypto was. He co-founded BitAngels, the world's first crypto angels network, back in 2013. He put his own money into Ethereum, I think at 30 cents. He launched and advised over 400 projects, and his book, Bitcoin Supercycle, nailed the exact timing of the 2025 cycle top at over 126K. When Michael speaks about cycles, people listen. And right now, with Bitcoin just breaking its daily downtrend for the first time in 2 months, after a wild, wild week, I want the Godfather's unfiltered take. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
And you know, Michael, last week felt like pure chaos. We ripped from the high 50s to almost 64.5K. Billions of dollars got liquidated. Apparently, a Satoshi era whale dumped about 5,300 Bitcoins. What was the first real sign of life in this bear market? Or is it just another classic relief rally designed to trap late and long before the next leg goes down?
Well, we're definitely getting in the, kind of final phase of the bear market. And that's always the hardest one to tell. You have to look at a lot of different signals. I mean, I still think that it's most likely that we still have one more leg down, but the reaction of the market to what MicroStrategy did in terms of raising more money in case there's one more downturn, so that look, they have a lot of short sellers out there, a lot of naysayers. I mean, there was just a piece that some banker came out with, retired banker, it's always the bankers, they know more about us than crypto, that said, they just need to go and unwind STRC, put it out of its misery, and blah, blah, blah. It's the only way that MicroStrategy will survive as a company. And, what happens when Bitcoin goes to 10,000 and all this stuff, it's just FUD. Because obviously, if Bitcoin goes back to 80,000, which it will, and it will be sooner than most people think, then he's got like forever. In fact, he actually has, I think, forever to pay the dividends off when it's in the, $70,000 range. So, yeah, this is all just short-term nonsense. And, it's interesting how the market dumped when he sold 32 Bitcoin, and it actually responded positively when he sold, 100 times that amount. So, because again, his new thesis is protect the dividends at all costs, which he is. And, and with that said, buy 10 times more Bitcoin than you sell. And all these folks saying, oh, he sold at a loss, he's going to dump everything. And first of all, he didn't sell at a loss, right? That's people who don't understand accounting. He bought 11,000 Bitcoins back in 2020 at 11 million or something like that. I forget the exact numbers, but he certainly, for those 2020 Bitcoins, which he still has most of, when they sell those, it's capital gain, not loss, at that mark. And while he's trading so far under NAV because of the FUD, it makes more economic sense for him to, sell these than to sell the Bitcoin than to sell the stock, right? And so this is just all, public company, narrative and planning, and it's also something that calmed the market.
I've been staring at the daily charts all week, and it looks like BTC just broke its daily downtrend for the first time in 2 months. First clean break. Does that actually shift anything?
Yeah, I mean, look, 64, if it continues to go, look, if you look at the last two cycles, we dumped in February, we dumped in June, and we recovered in July. In fact, the average, I put this on my LinkedIn post the other day, the average gain, in July of the last 2 cycles was about 18.5%. So, if we go up from that bottom where we ended in February, we'll be in the mid 70s. But yet they dumped harder after that. So I believe the pivot point where we are, technically in a bull market again is around the low 80s, and I don't see us getting, to the low 80s quickly or easily. So I think that we have one of 3 scenarios going forward. The most likely scenario, I said before, and I'm pretty close to that now, that the highest scenario is still dumping around October one more time. It's certainly a 30, maybe even 40% chance that this last 58K was enough. In some exchanges it was 57, and I said in February that I thought we were going to go down to about 57 at the best case, and we're there. We were there last week, and if this was the bottom, we're not exactly racing up to 250,000 by the end of the year. We're not going to be all-time highs under any scenario this year. It'll either be that was the bottom and we slowly fight beating resistance at 65K, at 70K, at 75K, at 80K. And if we do all of that without tripping below the prior lows on some bad news, some FUDs, et cetera, I think that the short seller narrative about Stretch and STRC, while it's not over with, if we dump again, people still bring it up, but they've got less data and less firepower to say that MicroStrategy and Stretch are both going under, and they have to unwind them. Again, people don't understand. A lot of voice on Twitter are like, oh, he's going to get a margin call. There are no margin calls. Oh, he's going to stop paying dividends. He's going to unwind everything. Everyone's going to sell their MicroStrategy. Look, this is a very heavily shorted stock. And, so is STRC, because, when it had a situation where it never would logically go over 100, you can spend a lot of energy trying to get it to go to 0. And it's not going to go to 0, but you can make fear of people that had bought it at 90 to panic sell at 80 or 75. But most people did not panic sell. If you look at the reality, it was people who thought that it was always going to stay around 100, and they went and leveraged it. And they leveraged it like 5 to 1, 10 to 1, and they got margin calls, and so they got liquidated. And the forced liquidations was what brought us down into the low to mid 70s. And that was an awesome time to buy. I mean, if you bought it at 73, collected your dividends, it's going to be back. I know it's going to be back to 100 someday, but even if you bought it at 73 and sold it when it hit 90, and I think that's what's keeping it from hitting 100 is the fact that a lot of people who bought it in the 70s are saying, good enough for me, and they're selling as soon as it hits 90, and then they see that it hits 90 and people panic and it goes down. So, it might take 6 months for us to, get out of the STRC being under 100, but I'm happy still, collecting my dividend. I wish I was collecting it from a 75 purchase price than from 100, but that's still 12%, and I still feel that the collateral is safe.
You have been consistent throughout the weeks that we have spoken, and even now on Bitcoin going lower in terms of the price in about October, it hitting the bottom. So if the breakout holds, and if we start grinding higher this week, what's that one thing that you would actually make you rethink the short-term theses? Or is it your bar for flipping?
Well, no, it's a few things. It's a few things.
High?
I mean, there's about 30 or 40 things that typically signal, the bottom. And, if more and more of them happened, right? So in other words, clearly if we went into the 80s with not much of a pullback between now and the 80s, then it'd be like, okay, 57 was the bottom. I already said there was at least a 30 to 40% chance that that's true. But I'm not like all of a sudden like, panic buying at 60, I mean, I would buy at 60, but I'm not panic buying if it hits 68, 70 or whatever. First of all, a good position to be right now is about 2/3 Bitcoin to sort of, keep a third in dry powder. And, I still believe that there's, ways of deploying that. If you were, holding most of your cash and buying heavily between 57 and 62, we were never either in the fund or personally completely out of Bitcoin. It's all averages, right? So at 126, there was, a lot of things saying that was the top, but there was also a chance that it was going to, rebound, that it was going to, recover. And, I think the top was the 4th. It was the 10th that really made it like, hey, this could be hard to recover from. And that was really when the chart sort of like just chimed in, and you had, as I've said many times, kind of a black swan on the 10th. It wasn't so much the bubble popping on the 4th that was the issue. It was the black swan that really kind of accelerated through the auto deleveraging on Binance and some shorting of MicroStrategy and just a lot of things that ended up being kind of a perfect storm. And then, of course, the one market maker, when the death cross came, just selling every day massive amounts, during New York business hours. And that's what got it down to where the charts kind of took over and made it unlikely that the bear market was not a reality. I mean, technical bear market is down 20%, and we're down by considerably more than that, by November.
And if you forget the price for a second, what should we actually be watching this week that most people are completely ignoring? Is it the more flow of the whales, ETF flows, flipping?
It's a number of things. I mean, this little bump today is kind of ascribed on the news narrative side to either be, Trump now making a deal after he said he didn't have a deal, after he said he had a deal, et cetera, et cetera. Today, it's like, oh, he's got a deal. And, obviously just a day or two ago, he said, no, we're deal's off. They broke the deal. We're back to bombing. So who knows what day it is, in terms of Iran. Seems like it's less bombing, at least. And oil is certainly, not at all-time highs or anything near it. It seems to be, sort of in the bear market itself from its highs. And so, I mean, it's little things, right? It's nothing significant. I mean, the Clarity Act is going to be important. We'll see what happens with that. If the Clarity Act passes, which I do not believe it will, then that'll be, something that will get TradFi to say, hey, time to start buying, and they'll push all the brokers out, and other people make announcements that they've been holding off on the Clarity Act. Meanwhile, you got Elizabeth Warren out there saying, this is going to be the end of the world if the Clarity Act passes, and all sorts of terrorists financing and all this stuff. So, it's there's not one single thing. I think that if we end up having, a rate hike in the next Fed meeting, that will be hurtful. I think I think this month you're going to get some inflation, or this week you're going to get some inflation numbers. If those are hot, that will hurt the rally. So I think there's a number of things on the macro side that show that we're not like in tailwind territory by any means. And there's just a lot of nervousness, but so far it looks like we haven't had anything catastrophic on the crypto news side, with Strategy and STRC kind of surviving its existential crisis that it had before announcing that they were indeed going to, sell enough Bitcoin to do what it takes. And again, let's be clear. I mean, the amount of Bitcoin they sold was still around like less than 0.5%. It's not like they just, and certainly the vehicle that they used to get up to their 830,000, if they not done that, they'd be nowhere near that. So the net buy over the last, pick any period, even the last month, is still more bought than sold. And if you look over the last, period since STRC came into existence, it's way more than 10 Bitcoin bought for everyone sold, which is what he was saying was more of the minimum model that they'd be looking for going forward. And quite frankly, they're only going to sell when it's, when the price of the stock is below MNAV, because it's cheaper it's more, it makes business sense to sell the Bitcoin than to sell the stock, knowing that they're both going to recover, but you're selling the stock at a much lower, price, relatively speaking, to break even than or to par than you would, And again, it's also all about you need to go and make sure that nobody is panic selling unless they're liquidated the STRC.
Well, liquid. I think the word liquidation has now become so personal to so many people right now that it kind of really hurts to even remotely hear that word. But Michael, I'm going to thank you for your time. I do have a bunch of questions, but then I'm going to let you focus on your next call.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time once again, and uh, this conversation means a lot to everybody out there. Michael is here to guide you in amongst the FUD, right? Don't get into the FUD. Join Aura8 every Friday at 7:30 Dubai time. Times can change a bit here and there, but Michael and his opinions are going to be strong. And Michael, do you have your book around you today? Since I'm guessing you're
I
in
do.
Costa
I
Rica.
hold it up a little bit earlier. There
Uh,
you go. It's sort of
there
making a
you
little
are,
blurred in
the
the
Bitcoin
blurring,
super
but
cycle.
available on Amazon and at bookstores. And then Bitcoin Supercycle.ai is the AI version. It includes audiobooks.
So go ahead and grab a copy of yours, and don't forget to visit Bitcoin Supercycle.ai. My name is Vaibhavv Ali, and there is our legend, Michael Terpin. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Valley. Okay.